So, Blade the series is the show that aired on Spike TV a few years ago. I watched it shortly after it came out on DVD and recently rewatched it again because I've been meaning to review this series and I needed to refresh my memory some of what had been going on in it. Uh, I've come to the conclusion that this is a really good series for a lot of the wrong reasons, but also is that it's extremely forgettable after you watch it too. Um, as it stands with the Blade movies, I love the first two of them. I despise the third one vehemently, and unfortunately, this series it will not make up for the fact that there is that god awful third movie. But it does excel in a lot of ways with some ideas from the first two movies that episodically take the opportunity to explore some avenues that were not able to be explored in the short amount of time the films were limited to. Uh, Let me start off with my main criticism of this series, which is the actor portraying Blade and the way that he stands as compared to the other characters. I'm sorry, but the guy who is playing Blade is just terrible to me. Apparently he's trying way too hard either to uh, imitate Wesley Snipes in the way that he talks, or apparently at the time that they made the series, David Goyer decided to tell the actor to try and use the Christian Bale Batman voice when he's speaking as Blade, which really goes wrong, and for the fact that this guy is such a wooden actor. Anytime Blade shows up on this series, I'm immediately bored by him, except for when he gets into a fight. Other than that, I just really don't like this guy playing him. I also hate the fact too that this series carries over the mistake from the third movie that while Blade is the title character, he's really outshined by his supporting cast. But the difference being with this and the third movie is that I actually like the supporting cast, in which in the third movie I really did not like anybody in that series or in that movie. The premise for this is that Blade and his new assistant have come to Detroit to infiltrate a vampire house, which is lorded over by Marcus Van Sciver, who is our antagonist for this series, or the main antagonist for this series. Um, Originally, Blade had this guy infiltrate the group as a familiar. He got found out. They didn't find out who was working for Blade, but they found out that he wasn't originally part of the group, and so they whack him. This guy's sister, who was in the army in I think it was either Iraq or Afghanistan, comes back home, finds out that her brother's been murdered, does some investigating, finds out about vampires, meets Blade. Uh, she gets bitten by Marcus. Blade helps her, and she's instead of her feeding on human blood, she's weaned on Blade's serum, and she becomes his inside agent in the House of Chthon. Uh, while all this is going on, a relationship begins to develop in between Krista and Marcus, and it's really one of the high points character wise in this series. Um, Krista, while the actress playing her is smoking hot, she goes through some really good character stuff in this, which I did not expect from her. The first time I watched this, I actually expected myself to hate this character. She was just shoehorned in to be eye candy, but she surprisingly does a good job acting and surprisingly has a lot to offer in this series as a main character. Um, Now, in between the first time I watched this and the second time I watched this, I went through True Blood. And there were points I liked True Blood, and it really went downhill as far as the character goes. But as far as I'm concerned, in a television series at least, uh, what they do with Krista portraying someone who was human and entering a vampire and having to leave all aspects of humanity behind is done extremely well. And just as the series goes on episodically, and just a lot of things that she liked or loved in her past human life are destroyed before her eyes, I find myself surprisingly moved for this character. Not enough to push me to tears, but I do find myself invested with the character and just a lot of the tragedy that she has to endure as her old life slowly disappears from her. And I kind of can also feel that too with Marcus in this, who is a turn-blood vampire, and they also kind of play up from the first movie the whole idea about the turn-bloods versus the pure-bloods. Van Sciver has Deacon Frost motivations, but he's not the F-bomb dropping character that's out there. I mean, he wants to get rid of the purebloods, but a lot of it is solely to do with revenge instead of just thinking that the vampires should take their place at the top of the food chain, ruling humanity. But as a vampire, he does also have disdain for humans in general, and the circumstances about how he identifies with Krista to start out with and his eventually falling in love with her, I can actually buy that as the series goes on. It does a really good job with that. Other areas in this too where this really excels is kind of unexpectedly, I found myself interested by a question which never really occurred to me concerning Blade is, what happens that if he bites someone, what happens to those vampires afterwards? And the series actually goes and answers that question, particularly with a minor villain who has a lot of past connections to Blade from his childhood. Blade, after he ran away from his father's home, and there's kind of an episode dealing with him and his childhood with his father after he was born. And they kind of throw in a Whistler cameo in this too, is that any of the vampires who are bitten by Blade because he's such a danger to the vampire nation, nobody will take them in. Usually all the vampires that are brought up are usually welcome into one house or another, but the ones that are turned by Blade are treated like complete fucking outcasts. They're lepers, nobody will touch them. And I actually really found this an interesting take for a villain motivation for someone to go after Blade. This was a really good idea that was explored, but which kind of comes apart as being a bit of a typical revenge story. Because the story kind of expands for 2 episodes, and it just comes off really lackadaisical at the end of it. There's some other good ideas which are brought up throughout the series. Some characters which you could grow to like are kind of disposable, particularly the FBI agent, who they make a big deal out of, but then the build up to what the character's all about is kind of a letdown once he has his episode when he teams up with Blade. Yeah, so there is that. There's also kind of a twist about what Van Sciver is tasked with as the vampire purebloods have instructed him to do. The animosity in between the purebloods and the turnbloods is also really explored pretty well in this series, and especially for what they have Marcus doing. The purebloods want a biological vaccine design that would eliminate all the vampire weaknesses to silver, sunlight, etc. And the House of Cathan sort of wants to take over and be the one ruling house of the vampire nation. But Marcus actually engineers the vaccine as a weapon solely against purebloods. Which unfortunately, this never really explains how it is able to discriminate against strictly the purebloods and not the turnbloods, as what the virus in the 3rd movie did. Not really explained much to my liking, but it is pretty good. And the final episode in this series is really well done action-wise, leads up to a cliffhanger, which is kind of generic. once Marcus finds out what Crystal's role and everything was. And it's at the very last second that they throw out this cliffhanger. Uh, Really bad note to end the series on, but not really a good cliffhanger, too, because I guarantee you if this had been renewed for a second season, um, there would have been some animosity in between Marcus and Krista, but they still would have continued working together once he found out that Blade originally wants him to move up the ladder so it can continue taking out the purebloods. Overall, this is a pretty good series, as I said, for all the wrong reasons. The supporting characters in this are a lot better than what the main character is. And I know with the idea, too, that Blade is supposed to be kind of this stoic, level-headed type character that we are expected to believe is a badass, but just the performance from the actor is generic, and while a lot of the stuff is good in it, it's just a really forgettable series at the end of it. If you're a fan of the movies, you really hated the third movie, you kind of hesitated about getting into this, it's not so good that it will wash away the stain that is the third movie, but it will episodically explore a lot of ideas better